there. Awesome. All right, back to where we were.
Everybody's got to accept the recorder too.
They have to accept the recorder? Okay, I'm not sure what that was, but what I'm going to do is record it onto the cloud, and then I'll send you a link to that so you guys can come back and watch this again a little bit. Or but we're going to throw a whole bunch of information at you, so some of it will be just too much to remember. So it'd be nice to be able to have it somewhere where you can go back and review it again. I'll probably also send a link where you can download the whole thing if you want to, just this PowerPoint part. Okay, we have some terms that we're going to be using. Perching is pretty self-explanatory. It's when the birds sit and wait. But these are actually strategies of ways that different raptors hunt. And some of them sit and wait. For example, a red-tailed hawk sits on top of a telephone pole and waits for its prey. Some of them actually hover in place. They hold their position over ground with quick wing beats, like a kestrel or a rough-legged hawk. Some of them do kiting, where they just use the wind to allow them to hold a position over the ground without flapping their wings. And red tails do that quite a bit, as long as it's a real windy day. The kites themselves are really famous for being able to do that, but we don't have any kites in Central Oregon. There are pursuers, which just go on level flapping flight and run their prey down like a peregrine falcon. And then we have coursers who fly low and patrol an area real slow and try to fly as low and slow as they can, like a northern harrier. And then we have those that stoop, which means they dive from high altitudes and hit their prey, usually with closed talons, and break their backs like the peregrine falcon does. And then every once in a while, you'll find some smaller raptors, especially, that are out fly catching, like a bunch of yellow-rump warblers, where they're just out flying. If there's some kind of a hatch, they'll take advantage of that and be out actually catching flies on the wing. So lots of different hunting strategies that we'll be talking about as we go along. Okay. Oops. Here are the groups of or the families of raptors that we're going to be talking about today. We have the falcons, and they have long pointy wings, and they have vertical face stripes. It's a little bit like the football players put stripes under their eyes. They have stripes under their eyes so that they can cut down on glare, just like the football players. Most of those guys, the falcons, are bird eaters. We have the eagles, which are birds that have very long wings, and they're very big and bulky animals. They feed mostly on rabbits and rodents, but some eagles, like bald eagle especially, will take fish and carrion. Almost all of these guys will take carrion if they have to. I've seen almost every species that we're going to talk about here feeding on carrion in the wintertime when food is hard to find. We have the harriers, of which we only have one representative. There are harriers around the world, but we only have one, the northern harrier, and it has long wings and tail. It's a slender body, has an owl-like face, dihedral wings, and it's mostly a rodent and a bird eater. Now, we're going to be going over these things slowly, so if I'm going very quickly, don't panic. I'm just introducing these guys, and then we're going to talk about the accipiters, which half of you are probably tuned in just for that one little group. And these guys have short, round wings with long tails, and those short, round wings and long tails allow them to pursue little birds through the forest to make very fine-tuned kind of back and forth movements through the trees to try to catch those little birds. So we're going to take a look at each of these groups, the individuals within those groups, and that'll be our program for the day. We're going to concentrate on identification. There's a whole lot of stuff about these birds that are interesting, but we won't have time to talk about today. We won't have time to talk about their feeding habits, their hunting methods. We will talk a little bit about their hunting methods because that helps you in identification. But we're going to concentrate on identification, not behavior, not not migration or anything like that. I think I'm going to have another program later on, maybe next year, just about raptor biology and raptor behavior, and forget about the identification stuff, because that's what we end up concentrating on every time. But that's also what most people are interested in, because it can be a little bit frustrating. So these are the principles. These are the 14 different kinds of diurnal raptors. And when I use the word diurnal, that means daytime. It's the opposite of nocturnal. And these guys are active during the day, and they're out hunting, and they're usually after either rodents or small birds, or medium-sized birds in some cases, depends on the critter. There are a few exceptions to those guys, and we'll get to those exceptions when we get to them. But I'm going to be talking about these guys individually, one at a time, starting with the Northern Harrier. Okay, so identifying Northern Harrier is not terribly difficult, because there's only one of them, and they're quite a bit different from everybody else in a number of different ways. Number one, they have a white rump patch. So if you look at the bird on the bottom left that's in flight there, this is a female Northern Harrier. And if you look right at where her tail starts, there's a big white patch right there. Now that white patch is not on the tail. It's actually on the back of the bird, so we call that area the rump. You can see a little bit of that white patch also in the middle picture on the bottom center picture. And that's a telltale sign that you're looking at a harrier if you have that white patch in the rump right there. Now, there are other things to look for, and it's always a good idea, and I'll be stressing this with every species. Don't pick one field mark on any of these guys and go with that one field mark and think you're going to be right most of the time, because you may not be. So yeah, you want to make sure that you're checking more than one field mark. Another thing I'd like to draw your attention to then is look at the upper right-hand picture and notice that that bird has very long wings, and the wings aren't particularly wide. They're pretty narrow. Long and narrow, and then that tail kind of sticks out, and it sort of gives it a capital T look to it a little bit, and only with the wings a little bit out of proportion as far as being a little bit longer than the tail would be. So that's something to really look for when you see that long, narrow wings, narrow body, narrow tail, and long tail sticking out, then you're probably looking at a harrier. If you can get a close-up look, then you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a Northern Harrier. Looks like a younger, probably female, but a juvenile bird, a bird that's less than 2 years old anyway. And that bird right there shows a nice little owl face to it. It has a little facial disc like an owl, because it hunts much like an owl hunts. Owls use their hearing a lot for hunting, and so do Northern Harriers. Northern Harriers will course over, and remember, coursing means you're flying low and slow over the marsh or grassland area, and trying to listen for any mice that it scares up. And it can actually hear them running through the grass, and then it can pick them up either by sight or hunt them entirely by sound, and feed on them that way. So that's what we see harriers doing all the time, is coursing through the Crooked River wetlands or Houston Lake or some of these marshy areas around Central Oregon. And that's where you'll find them most often. So look for the long wings and the long tail, look for the owl face, look for the white patch in the rump, and that coursing behavior. You're probably going to have a Northern Harrier. Northern Harriers come in 3 different colors anyway. The one on the upper left or the left side is the male, and the males are pretty good, are pretty well silvery in color by their second year. The first year birds look more like the bird in the middle, that's that orangey color, but then the males turn into a nice little gray or silver color, and the females turn into a little bit of a light brown color. And the bird on the far right is a female, and the bird in the far left is a male. The one in the center is a juvenile. When you see harriers in flight, sometimes they're a little bit confusing, because they don't look like much of anything else, and you sort of forget about harriers. You're thinking, no, it can't be a red-tailed hawk because the wings are too narrow, and they're too long. And when you see these guys flying, they look odd. That should be a trigger for you in identification. If it looks odd, it might be a harrier. That should be their first thought. If it looks really strange, it might be a harrier, because they're fairly common, and they're just a lot different looking than some of the other birds. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a nice little photo that I stole off the internet, showing a bald eagle and a northern harrier next to each other. And clearly they're different shaped kind of birds, different size birds. And that one bird that in the top position definitely looks like something unusual. And so that's the way I want to direct your brain a little bit, is if it looks unusual, it might be a northern harrier. You can go there first anyway, because you're going to be right a good portion of the time. Once again, though, let's take a look at our characteristics. And the upper left-hand bird is a male, because it's silvery in color. It has long and narrow wings, which makes us think harrier. It has a pretty long tail that comes out. That makes us think harrier. It has an owl-like face. That makes us think harrier. We're going to watch this bird for a little while until it banks. And on the back side of it, in the rump area, it's going to have a white patch. And that's going to make it a northern harrier. That's how you do it. Next group of birds we're going to take a look at are the eagles. And we have two representatives here. We have the one on the left, which is a golden eagle, and the one on the right is a bald eagle. And these guys collectively together make up the group of eagles, and their characteristics are they're very big, they're huge. They have long wings and to their bodies. Even though their bodies are huge, their wings are even longer. And they stick out. When you see them in the sky, you know how most red-tailed hawks, or most hawks, look like a plus sign. The distance from the head to the tail, the distance from the two wings are roughly the same. They're at 90-degree angles to each other, so they look like flying plus signs. But eagles don't look like that. Eagles look out of proportion. Their wings are longer. So you can tell if something's an eagle rather than a hawk by that proportion in the wing, in the distance between the two wing tips and the distance between the head and the tail. So try to think of that as being sort of an oblong or out of kilter plus sign when we're talking about the eagles. Let's take a look at bald eagle first. Adult bald eagles are no-brainers. We won't spend hardly any time on them because everyone knows what adult bald eagle is. It's on your money. So everybody knows that. It has a white head and a white tail. It doesn't get those white head or white tail until the 4th or 5th year. What determines whether it gets a white tail in the 4th year or the 5th year is a whole lot of things, and not the least of which are genetics and the environment they're around, how much food they get, that kind of thing. So somewhere around their 4th or 5th year, they'll get that pure white head and pure white tail. But before that, then they're not white-headed and white-tailed, so they're not so easy. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just on the juvenile eagle. The adult eagle has a large yellow bill that we'll be looking at, and that can be really important if you're trying to tell the difference between the juvenile eagles, because the bill size is a really big difference. But these guys have huge bills, bigger than the golden eagles by a long way. They hold their wings very flat when they soar. And this is something that you don't really see very often because they often soar way above you and you're looking up directly underneath them, so you don't see how flat their wings are. If you go up to a hawk migration site in the fall, the hawks and the eagles migrate, and you get up in the mountains where they're migrating right at you at eye level. You can really see this. You can identify the bald eagles from a great distance when they're just little dots in the sky, because they hold their wings so flat in relationship to their body. I tried to show that a little bit in that photo in the upper right there, where it says the wings held straight as a board. And that's about as good a photo as I could find that shows that, but that's something to think about. As far as the immature bald eagles go, they're huge. People all the time say, what's bigger, a golden eagle or a bald eagle? And I say yes. Because they're essentially the same size. They're really pretty much exactly the same size. And but having said that, if you look at the heads on the two birds, the bald eagle's head looks much bigger because it has that big giant bill. It's way bigger than a golden eagle's bill. And then the big thing that I want you to concentrate on, the thing I'll be stressing here when we talk about the juveniles, is that the immature ones are covered in salt and pepper plumage. That means white and black speckles. And that's going to be important because we don't have too many, or we don't have that white and black speckled appearance in the golden eagles. So it's one of the ways we're going to distinguish between juvenile golds and juvenile balds. And then if you can get a good enough close look, if you can see their legs well, if the legs are covered in feathers, then they're probably going to be a golden eagle. If their legs are featherless and yellow, they're probably going to be a bald eagle. But as you can see, the bird that's sitting on the bottom left down there, that guy's got his belly feathers kind of fluffed up to cover his feet. And so you can't really tell if he has feathers on his legs or not. So those are things to think about. But let's go ahead and get away from the bald eagle, talk a little bit about the golden eagle, if I can. There it goes. And then we'll take a look at the two of them together. An adult golden eagle has a little bit of golden feathers on the back of its head. It has a smaller bill than that bald eagle, as I mentioned. When it flies directly at you, when you're at high elevations, looking at it flying at eye level, it has a slight dihedral to the wings. It holds the wings up at a slight angle. Nothing real dramatic like a turkey vulture or anything like that, but a slight dihedral in that instead of being completely flat 90 degrees to the ground, they raise their wings up just a couple of inches, and they soar that way. And so you can tell the difference between golden eagles and bald eagles from a long distance, really, at least to start with anyway, just by how they hold their wings. The immatures are very dark, and that's important. Remember with the bald eagles, we said the immatures are salt and pepper. The immature golden eagles are very dark. Take a look at that bird that's on the bottom left. That bird is really dark, and that's a juvenile golden eagle. Their plumage is real dark. Now, everyone's a little bit different, and there are occasionally some light ones, but we'll talk about that in just a second. We can still separate the two pretty easily. The immature golden eagles do have some white patches, but those white patches are confined to particular areas. One of them is the base of the tail, and the other one is out in the area out where I'm going to call the wrist area, which is about a little more than halfway out on the wings, right where the wing bends. There are white patches there. Remember in the bald eagle, the juveniles have white and black peppering all over their body, but the golden eagles, that white is confined to specific regions in the base of the tail and in the wrists. And then again, if you can get the look at the legs, that's great. You can see the legs on the bird that's on the upper right. You can see those legs have little feathering all the way down to the toes. But the bird on the left, you can't see the legs at all, so it doesn't help you that much. But look for that feathering if you can see it. Now, most of you don't really struggle that much with adult bald and golden eagles. You struggle with juvenile eagles. And so I want to spend some time on the juvenile eagles. This page right here covers only juvenile bald eagles. And I tried to pick a bunch of photos from different places and different stages of life with the juveniles. But let me start in the upper left-hand corner here. We have a juvenile bald eagle that looks a lot like a golden eagle. Golden eagles are dark, and this bird is dark. And golden eagles have white patches. Instead of having the white scattered all over their body, they have the white just in certain places. Well, that could happen with this bird because you can't see those places. But one of the things that really sticks out with this guy is look at that bill. That bill is huge and it's big, and it takes a little bit of practice to look at the two together. But that bill is way bigger than any golden eagle bill. And that tells me, along with, there's another little hint, and that is that the juvenile bald eagles tend to have sort of a two-tone bill where it's black on the tip and yellow near the face. And that bird has that thing too. It tells me that that's a bald eagle that looks a little bit like a golden eagle. The second picture is a nice little example of the salt and pepper that I'm talking about. It has white on it, but the white is scattered along with a lot of black, to where you just have little tiny patches, no big blotches of white. The bird that's in the middle here, the third one from the left, is a bird that's just an odd one. I took that picture out in Paulina a few years ago, and it just goes to show you there's all kinds of color combinations that can happen. But again, this guy is more kind of mixed black and white color than it is a solid dark color, and that tells me, suggests to me that it's probably a bald eagle. Then I look at that massive bill again, and I go, yep, that's a bald eagle. Once they get into about their third year, they start looking a lot like bald eagles. That's the top bird on the top right. That's a third or fourth year bird there, and he or she is looking a lot like a bald eagle. And then once they get to that stage, and you don't have too much trouble telling what they are. Down at the bottom, I have two birds in flight, and then a picture of the eagles from underneath, bald eagles from underneath. But again, those two birds in flight, notice that we have a big mix of black and white feathers that are scattered all over the bird. And especially, if I can draw your attention to this, look at the middle picture on the bottom, and look in the armpit area. See that real white area right there? That area is almost clean white in that bird, but it's clean white in in most of the juvenile bald eagles. When we get to golden eagles in a second, that area is never white. So it's another thing to kind of look for that area from the armpit out to the wrist. There's a lot of white there, but that's not going to happen in golden eagles. Okay, try to keep that in mind. But the key field mark is that salt and pepper. Look for salt and pepper. If you've got a salt and pepper bird, you probably have a bald eagle. If you've got a solid dark bird with patches of white, then you've probably got a golden eagle. All right, let's look at a juvenile golden eagle then. If we look in the upper left-hand corner has a picture of a juvenile golden eagle. I can't see a lot of white in the wings on the back, but there is a little bit, but it's clear out by the wrist. And then the tail has a big patch of white in it. Instead of being white scattered all through the back of that bird, the white is concentrated in certain areas, and the rest of the bird is dark. And that tells me that that's probably going to be a golden eagle. You can kind of see the golden eagle pretty easily if you get a nice, beautiful view like the upper right-hand picture has a nice close view like that. For one thing, you can see that it has feathered legs all the way down to the toes, and you see that nice white band in the tail. And if he could lift his wings up, he'd probably have nice white markings in the underside of the wings too. I can draw your attention to the two birds on the bottom left. Here we have two examples of two birds that look like the same bird. They're not the same bird, but they look very similar to each other, because that's generally what the pattern for a golden eagle is. Juvenile golden eagles have a white patch area at the base of their tail, and they have white in the wrists on the right side and the wrists on the left side, and nowhere else. Take a look at the two birds that are on the bottom left and find that armpit area that we were talking about with the bald eagle just a second ago. Notice it's jet dark right in there, all the way out to the wrist. There's no, and so you almost never see any coloration of any kind, any white of any kind in those areas from the armpits out to the wrist on the golden eagles. And if you don't see any of that, then it's probably a golden eagle. If you do see some spots in there of white, then you probably want to start leaning towards the bald eagle. Okay. Last year we were doing a winter raptor survey. I think Bob off the air was with me, and we found a juvenile bald eagle and a juvenile golden eagle, and they were flying together. And I managed to get out of the car fast enough to snap a couple of photos before they separated from each other. But the upper left-hand photo gives you a really nice, a nice view of some of the things that we were talking about. The front bird is a golden eagle. The back bird is a bald eagle. Now the back bird is relatively easy because it has a white tail and a white head, and it's going into adult plumage closely to it anyway. But let's assume that that weren't the case. Let's say the head were dark and the tail was dark. We still have all that white in that armpit area out to the wrists, and the white is scattered in with a whole bunch of black. So it's sort of salt and peppered, scattered around like that. That tells us that that's a bald eagle. The front bird has no white from the armpits out to the wrists. And the white is only concentrated right in the wrist area out where the primaries and secondaries start. And so you have two white patches, one on the right wrist, one on the left wrist, and then you have a white base of the tail. And then if you want the total clicker for the whole thing, is compare the head size or the bill size of the two birds on the upper left and see how much more massive the bald eagle is than the golden eagle. And once you get that kind of in your head, you can really pick them out just by bill size alone. Okay, let's move on from the eagles and go into the falcons. We have 5 different kinds of falcons here, but really only 4. The one that's in the very center there is called a gyrfalcon, and we have a half a dozen or so records in Central Oregon of gyrfalcon, but I'm not going to talk about it very much. We've never had a gyrfalcon stay here. All the records are of birds just flying by and going somewhere. And so we've never had one that would stay put in the place and let people look at him. So I'm going to skip the gyrfalcon and concentrate just on the other 4 here. These falcons have some things in common. One thing is, and this is very important, because a lot of people mistake falcons for other things, especially accipiters. And one of the things that you can really concentrate on is take a look at the eyes. The eyes of each one of these guys, if you can see them at all, the eyes are jet black. And that's because the pupils of most birds are black, which is that's just what to be expected. But the irises that go around the pupils are not generally black, but in the falcons they are. So when your iris is black and your pupil is black, then your whole eye is black, and that's a characteristic of being a falcon. Now there are other characteristics, most of which you can't see from these views. One of them is that it has a little notch on the bill. And the upper mandible of the bill has a little notch that's like a tooth. It's not a tooth. It's made of the same thing as the bill is made of, but it's sort of like a little jagged knife-like thing that sticks down. And they use that to break the necks of their prey. And that's only found in the falcons, but you have to see like a close-up of the head to see that thing. You almost never see it in the wild. So I didn't actually include it, but it is one of the characteristics of the falcons. Other things about them is that they're very fast flyers. They have these very pointed jet-like wings that sweep backwards, allow them to fly very quickly. And then they have facial stripes. Some of them have 1, some of them have 2. Our most common falcon and probably second most common raptor, diurnal raptor anyway, is the American kestrel. It's unique in a number of different ways, but one way is that it's the males and females are quite a bit different looking. They're different colors. That's unusual for most of the birds of prey. Most of the birds of prey, they're either the same color or everybody's a different color. So, but the males and females of this species look quite a bit different. The patterns are generally the same. It's just the amount of intensity. The male on the left over there has some nice little silver blue wing linings there and nice bright orange feathers. And the female doesn't have either one of those things, but she has the same general facial pattern, just a little bit of duller color on the back. It possesses 2 of those facial stripes instead of 1, and which is a little bit of a mystery as to why that would happen, because the second stripe probably doesn't affect its eyesight at all. It may just be something that these guys developed to be able to distinguish themselves from other falcons. One of the things that's unusual about them, since they are a falcon, is that their flight is pretty much slow and methodical. The other falcons they're bombers. They go as fast as they can all the time. And these guys kind of lollygag around. You'll see them fly when you try to take a photo of them, for example, they'll fly 10 or 15 feet away and land on the pole, the next pole down, and then you go and take another picture, and then it flies to the next pole down. It sort of lollygags, and none of the other falcons do that. They're built for speed, but this guy's the slowest of the bunch. And then finally, they do a lot of hovering flight. They do a lot of hunting from a hover. They'll go out over a field, and we'll talk about how they spot their prey at another time. But they'll go out over a field and they'll hover in one place and just wait. And they'll wait over the top of a mouse trail, and they'll wait for that mouse to go running along, and they'll dive down and get the mouse. They also hunt from a perch, so you'll see them on telephone wires especially, but they do a lot of that hovering flight. If you see a small bird hovering out in the open, then you might want to think of either maybe a mountain bluebird or a American kestrel, because they're two common ones that will do that around here. Another bird that is a falcon that's nearly the same size as the kestrel, it's just a little bit bigger, is the merlin. And the merlin's sort of the ugly cousin of the kestrel. The kestrel's got all those beautiful colors and beautiful feathers. The merlin's mostly kind of dull. It's sort of dull gray or dull brown. There are a lot of different forms that come in a lot of different colors, but they're a little different from the kestrel in a couple of ways. First of all, their sexes are similar, so you really can't tell males from females unless they're side by side, and you tell by size. They're either light brown to completely black and anywhere in between. And they usually only have one facial stripe that comes down straight down from the eye, but that one facial stripe is often hidden in the plumage itself and kind of hard to see. So a lot of times you have a hard time picking out the stripe at all, to find out that it's to prove to yourself that it's a falcon. But then ask yourself right now, look at the middle picture, go, okay, if I couldn't see the facial stripe, how would I know this is a falcon? And the answer is that big black eye looking right at you. And that will help you a whole bunch. And then remember that these guys are fast flyers. They don't lollygag around. They're bombing around. When we saw our merlin at the wetlands the other day, he was just sitting in one place for a while. And then when he took off, he was out of sight in about 5 seconds. There are 3 different variations of merlin, or 3 different kinds of merlin. I'm not sure they're subspecies technically, but they're 3 different forms anyway. And they're called the prairie merlin, the taiga merlin, and the black merlin. And they're mostly a function of 2 things: how dark they are and how much of an eye stripe they have. So if you look at the one on the far left, the prairie merlin, it has a very faint eye stripe, and it's a very pale bird. The one in the center is kind of a paler bird as well, but not as pale as the first one, and it has clear eye stripes. And then the one in the middle, the black merlin, the one on the right side, the black merlin, it has very dark markings to it, sometimes almost completely black, and you can't see the eye stripe very well because the head's already so darn black, you can't see the black stripe. It is there though. So we do get all these guys. The 2 that are on the end are by far the rarest of the 2. Most of the birds we get are the taiga birds, the ones that are in the middle. But even the one that's in the middle will get a lot of variation from that taiga species. But again, look for that eye stripe, and you can separate them if you're interested in separating the subspecies. People have a hard time telling merlins from kestrels, so I wanted to throw them up here for you and just give you an idea of how much color there is in a kestrel and how much lack of color there is in a merlin. And that really can be your yardstick as far as telling these guys apart. It is nice to know that the merlin is not here year round. The kestrel is here year round, but the merlin is only found here in the winter months. In the colder months anyway, from about now, late September maybe, all the way through till April, or early April anyway, and then they go north to nest. So you're not going to find a merlin here in the summertime. Probably there are no known records in the state of Oregon. In fact, there's a running bet on what the next nesting species is going to be, and some people are betting on merlin, but we haven't found a merlin nest yet in the state of Oregon. But again, to tell these guys apart, what you really have to concentrate on is color. The Merlins are pretty dull colored, and the Kestrels are pretty brightly colored. And then more often than not, if you're going to confuse a Merlin with another bird, you're probably going to confuse it with an accipiter, and more than likely a sharpshin, because it's a small bird. A Merlin is a small bird. And so I get maybe 3, 4, 5 times a year, I get people that send me photos and go, is this a Sharpie or a Cooper's? And I have to tell them it's a Merlin. And that's nothing to be embarrassed about, because I can tell you that once we were in northeastern Oregon, and I had a pile of birders with me. They weren't with me; I was with them, and they were some of the better birders in all of the state. And we stood around and tried to figure out if something was a Merlin or a sharpshin, because it was sitting behind this telephone pole. We couldn't see it very well, and those guys have a hard time figuring it out. And we didn't know for sure until it flew off and we could see the shape of the bird. But just to go over again, let's say we have a bird and we think it might be a sharpshin, we might be a Cooper's, or it might be a Merlin. How do you tell? The biggest thing is look at those eyes. It's all about the wings, and it's all about the tails, and it's all about the eyes. The eyes are black on the upper left-hand bird. The eyes are yellow on the bottom right-hand bird. So the bottom right-hand bird cannot be a falcon. So that eliminates Merlin right off the bat. We'll get on how to figure out if it's a sharpshin or a Cooper's here in a second. The next thing to look for is the length of the wings. So if you can find the wings on the Merlin, the upper left-hand bird, go up on the shoulder and kind of follow the wings down. They're a little short of the tail. The tail sticks out a little bit longer than the wings, but it's not a whole lot. Now, if you do the same thing with the bird that's on the bottom right, start on the shoulder, follow it down to the wingtip, there's a whole lot of tail after that. So the wings on the bird on the right are very short. The wings on the bird on the left are pretty long. And the Merlin has long wings and the sharpshin has short wings. And then finally, the tail, both of them have striped tails, but again, take a look at how far the tail sticks out on the bird on the left and how far the tail sticks out on the bird on the right. Both of them have striped tails that are striped kind of pale and dark alternately. So that can fool you, but look at the length. Don't look at the color. Look at the length. The bands are different in the Merlin too, but we'll get to that another time. We do have more falcons than just those guys. We have, we talked earlier today that a couple of prairie falcons have been seen already. And here I have some prairie falcons for you. They're medium-sized falcons. The males and the females pretty much look the same, and they can either be a brownish or grayish color, but mostly they're dusty colored, because they're birds of the desert, and they're going to want to blend into that sandy desert kind of color, that sagebrush dull gray color of the desert, because that helps them sneak up on their prey. These guys are ambush predators. They'll sit on a perch somewhere, then they'll take off and they'll fly real low across the top of the sagebrush, and then sneak up on a baby sage grouse or something like that, and hit it by surprise and take that prey that way. They have a thin vertical head stripe, just one, but that head stripe is much thinner than the peregrine falcon that we're going to come up with in just a second here. Take a look at. So a very thin, pale, not necessarily pale, but a very thin stripe that comes straight from the eye, straight down. And then when you see the bird in flight, look at the birds in the upper left there, birds in flight. Notice those black markings in the armpits. That's a dead giveaway for prairie falcon. None of the other falcons, none of the other birds of prey are going to have that in Central Oregon. So that's a deal breaker right there. As soon as you see those black armpits, then you know you got yourself a prairie falcon. And then like the other falcons, it has nice pointed wings to help it fly very quickly and catch its prey. That's the prairie falcon. Then we get to the biggest of our regular falcons anyway, is the peregrine falcon. It's big, it's large, it's nearly the size of a red tail. It's not as big as most red tails, but it's as big as a normal male red tail anyway. And but it has the shape of a falcon. It has those very pointed, long pointed wings that are built for speed. And this guy's another one of those ambush predators. It depends entirely on speed. Rather than perch and fly and sneak up on its prey, though, it prefers to fly very high and then take a dive onto the prey and stoop down and pick up a whole lot of speed and attack its prey like that. That's called stooping. It's large. The sexes are similar, as we mentioned before. They're very dark. In fact, they're almost black in color, and the parts of their body that are dark are really dark. And that will help you separate that from the prairie falcon. The only real problem you have separating or misidentifying the peregrine falcon is misidentifying it as a prairie falcon. And prairie falcons are very, very light gray. These guys are very, very black. The older they get, the blacker they get. And that doesn't mean that the only thing that makes them black is their age, but if they're really, really black on the back and on the head, they're probably peregrine falcon. And then the kicker here is to look at the bird in flight is the easiest, or the center picture. Notice the eye stripe that comes down from the eye is very thick. It's wider than the eye most of the time. And that's much different from prairie falcon. Prairie falcon's a little tiny skinny line that comes down from the eye. Has those pointed wings that the other falcons have, so it can fly quickly. We finally got here. This is what most of you came for. The accipiters, how do you tell them apart? And the answer is very carefully, of course. As a group, these guys have short, broad wings, and they have a long tail for maximum maneuverability. Again, they hunt their prey in forested, tree-like habitats that are, your yard's kind of a tree-like habitat probably, and so you get these guys coming and eating your bird feeder birds. That's their natural habitat in those trees to feed on those guys like that. The male's often considerably smaller than the females in this group. That's true for most birds of prey, but it can be kind of dramatic with these guys. A male Cooper's hawk is a lot smaller than a female Cooper's hawk, and a male sharp-shinned hawk can be a lot smaller. Now, I shouldn't say the male is a lot smaller. It can be a lot smaller. There's a gradation between the smallest males and the largest males. The largest males are nearly as big as the females, the smallest females. And then the smallest females, there's a gradation between that so there's a giant gradation between all of these things. So that you don't think that all the male sharp-shinned hawks are little tiny guys, because some of them are little tiny guys and some of them are a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. That's true for all three of these guys. Here we have our three accipiters, the sharp-shinned on the left, Cooper's hawk on the center, and the goshawk on the right. So let's talk sharp-shinned. How do you tell a sharp-shinned hawk from a Cooper's hawk or from some of the other hawks? Well, a couple of things. First of all, it's a small bird. And even when you find a large female, she's not as big as most Cooper's hawks. She's still small. She's about the size of a kestrel, roughly, in that area, if you're familiar with kestrels. She has a small, very roundish kind of head that gives her sort of a pixie look, like a cute little look to her. Now, when we get to the Cooper's hawks, they're going to look mean. They're going to look fierce. But these guys look pixie. They look like they have little round heads with little tiny bills. They have these bright red eyes that make them look kind of evil, but they're actually kind of cute little guys, I think. And that's one of the things to keep in mind. Just look at the overall shape of the bird. If it looks kind of cute, it's probably going to be, or might be, a sharp-shinned hawk. Another thing is to look for the eye, the position of the eye. This is a little tricky. It doesn't work all that often, but notice the bird in the bottom right, how that big eye is kind of dilated there. It's kind of looking at you, but that eye is placed right in the center of the head. Center of the head in the sense that it's about equal distance to the back of the head and to the front of the head where the bill is. In the Cooper's hawk, that's not going to be the case. Now, having said that, if you look at the bird on the left, and look at the eye position there, it doesn't look like that bird's very centered. So there's variation here. But overall, most sharp-shinned hawks, the eye is placed right in the center of the head, or pretty close to the center of the head. much more towards the center anyway than the Cooper's hawk will be. So eye position can be important. Adult birds differ from juvenile birds. The bottom left-hand bird is an adult bird. It has a reddish front and dark back and a black cap. And that black cap extends all the way down past the nape on the back of the neck. The bird that's in the upper right is a juvenile sharp-shinned hawk. And that guy has sort of little brown streaks in the front that are very teardrop shaped in some birds. You can find those teardrop shaped feathers in all three species, but they're a little bit more common in the upper breast anyway, in the sharp-shinned hawk. And what am I missing here? Oh, let's take a look at the legs here. You can't see the legs very well in the juvenile, but you can see them quite well in the adult. So if you look down at the adult and on the bottom left-hand side there and try to find the legs there, notice how skinny those legs are. It's hard to tell exactly how thin that is, but if you were to ask yourself, looking at that little spigot there and kind of knowing about how big that is to give you a little bit of scale, is that leg bigger than a pencil or smaller than a pencil? And I think you could answer with pretty good confidence that the thickness of that leg would be smaller than a pencil. And that's one of the rules I use for with sharp-shinned hawks, is look for those legs and see if they have little skinny, more like the straw we used to put in our little milk cartons when they gave them to us when we were in elementary school. That's about the circumference of the leg of a sharp-shinned hawk. So the legs are thin. I mentioned the nape is dark. It's very short-headed in flight. And I think you can see that a little bit in the upper left-hand corner. Just a second here. I got a chat question, I think. Sorry. I'm not used to taking questions on the fly there. Somebody asked about the red eyes and the yellow eyes. And the red eyes and the yellow eyes has to do with the maturity of the bird. And also a bit of the mating season too. When the mature adult bird is in the midst of its mating plumage and mating behavior, it has bright red eyes, and then those eyes fade a little bit to duller red eyes later in the year. The juveniles don't have any red eyes at all, because that red eye functions as a bit of an attractant in the mating process, and the juveniles are not mating, so they don't need that red eye. Anyway, I want to go back to the short-headedness. If you go to the upper left-hand picture of these four, you see a bird in flight here, and you'll notice that bird's head sticks out away from the body. But if you also notice the wings kind of right at the wrists kind of inch their way forward a little bit. If you were to take a piece of a string and tie it from the right wrist to the left wrist, there would only be about half of a head sticking out of that bird past the string. And so that's one of the characteristics of sharp-shinned hawks. Their head doesn't stick out very far when it flies like this. When it soars, the head doesn't stick out very far in the front. From a distance, that head almost disappears. And so when you see a bird soaring way out in a distance and you can't find the head, then you can be at least suspicious that it might be a sharp-shinned hawk. A lot of people like to put a lot of like to take a look at that tail and put a lot of weight on the shape of the tail. I just don't like it. I get fooled too many times by that, but it can be kind of useful if you get a real nice, sharp, squared off tail like this bird in flight. It's probably a sharp-shinned hawk. But so many of the sharp-shinned hawks we see in migration have worn tails where the edges are worn, and you can even see on the bottom right hand or bottom left hand bird how the tail gets a little bit rounded on the edges, and it makes it kind of confusing. I think the other field marks are better than the tail, but it's just another thing to throw into the pile. Let's take a look at Cooper's hawk, if I can make this run. Okay, good. So all the things we just talked about, sharp-shinned hawk, then Cooper's hawk is going to be a little bit different. It's medium size instead of small. The females are larger than males, like we mentioned before. They're large, flat-headed bird. Instead of being a round, pixie-headed or a round, cute bird, this guy has a flat head. and the flat head makes him, to me, it gives him kind of a sort of evil persona anyway, an evil look to him. Contributes to that anyway. And the bill is quite a bit bigger than the sharpshin's bill in relation to the head. And then also, then if you look at the upper right, top bird, find the center of his head from the top, from the back of the head to the tip of the bill. Find the center of his head, and notice that the eye is ahead of that or forward of that point. And that's another thing to look at. You can see that also on the bottom left-hand bird. You can see that the eye is forward from center. And if you look in the bottom center bird, the eye is forward from center as well. It's just one of the many things I want to stress when you're looking at accipiters. You have to look at everything. You have to look at the bill shape, the head shape, position of the eye, some of the other things we're going to talk about here in a bit. And once you looked at all that stuff, then you can make your decision, but it's a tough call. Adults, just like the sharp-shinned hawks, the adults are sort of red on the front and dark on the back. But instead of having that dark cap that goes all the way down the back of the neck, Cooper's hawks have a dark cap that ends up about halfway down the back of the head. And then it turns to a gray feathers beyond that. You can see this a little bit in the bird that's on the bottom left. If you follow from the top of the head, go backwards, you'll see that there's a change in color of the feathers from dark colored, almost black, to gray in the nape area. And that's a Cooper's hawk characteristic. And then rather than having those little straw sized legs, I don't think you can see the legs of any of these birds, but they have much thicker legs than that, more like pencil thickness to their legs. All right, we take a look at Sharpie versus Coop then. This picture in the upper left gives you an idea of differences in sizes. Probably that's a male sharp-shinned on the left and a male Cooper's, male sharp-shinned on our right and a male Cooper's on our left, if that makes sense. The bigger one's the Cooper. How's that? Then if you look at the two pictures on the upper right, we have two birds. They both have black caps on top of their heads, but that black cap extends all the way down on the nape on the left-hand bird, and it stops about mid-head and turns into a lighter color on the bird on the right. The bird on the left has a rounded head. The bird on the right has a flat head. The bird on the left has small bill. The one on the right has a bigger bill. The bird on the left has a squared off tail. The one on the right has a round tail. In this case, it does help us a little bit. But we're looking at it, and if you look at the legs on the bird on the left, it's little tiny skinny legs. That's a sharp-shinned hawk, and the one on the right is the Cooper's hawk. If we go bottom left, when we take a look at that nape that I was talking about before, the one on the left has a nape that has a cap that's dark and goes all the way down the head, but it stops and changes into some lighter colored feathers around the nape area, the back of the neck. And then on the bird on the right, it stays pretty much dark all the way from the top all the way down the back. I have a question here. I'm not sure how to do it. So somebody raised their hand. Go ahead and just unmute and ask your question. I didn't see who it was. Oh, it's Bob. Bob, you got a question? You have to unmute yourself if you're there. He's not there. Okay, never mind. And then if we go bottom right hand, we got the birds in flight here. Let's just look just at where the position of the head is. The bird on the left, the head sticks completely out from the body. If I had a string and I took it from the left wrist to the right wrist, the whole head would still be ahead of the string. And the bird on the right, it's kind of subtle, but if I took a string and connected it to the two wrists, then that head would only stick out past that string just about half a head instead of a full head. And when these birds are in flight, that's a pretty good indication of a sharp-shinned hawk on the right and the Cooper's hawk on the left. This sharp-shinned hawk on the right also has a pretty squared off tail, And then the Cooper's hawk has a rounder tail. Again, we don't always see that, but in this case we do. And then finally, our last accipiter is one that I won't spend very much time on because we hardly ever see this bird down in it's a forest bird. It lives up in the Ochocos. Very rarely comes down. I don't recall even seeing one down in the lowlands, other than I did have them a couple of times at my house here in the junipers over by Powell Butte. But in Prineville, I don't think we've ever had this bird on the Christmas bird count in town. Anyway, I think we've had it a couple of times up in the mountains, but it's a pretty rare bird to find in the Ochocos. But it's up there. It's just a little bit hard to find. They're very wary, and they tend to see you before you see them, and they take off. They're big. They're almost red-tailed hawk size. The females are even bigger than the males. They have this nice white stripe that goes over the top of their eye, and that's the nice easy field mark. In any plumage, in any age, they'll have that white stripe over the eye. Even that real pale bird in the center there, that's a young bird, a juvenile bird. You can see the pale white right above the eye on that bird. The adults can be dark and light gray, but they don't have red in the front like the other ones do. The juveniles can be kind of brown or gray, and they're streaky, a lot like the juvenile Sharpies and Coopers. The juveniles tend to have thicker barring on the front than the other ones do, although the one that I showed you doesn't have that thick of barring, but it typically is very thick. And then they have a long and heavy tail. That heavy tail meaning a wider tail than most of the other accipiters have. And that's because they need a bigger tail to maneuver that big giant body. And in flight, if you look at the bottom right-hand bird, the sign up there says, in flight, they show the Gates curse. And the Gates curse is my belly hangs down. And that's one of the key things when you're seeing goshawks in flight, is that they look fat. They look like their bellies are hanging down like they're pregnant. Not like they're full. When birds eat prey and store it, they store it in their neck, in their crop. And so you'll have a big lump there. And it's not uncommon to see that when birds are in flight, carrying prey back to their young, or just carrying prey, food in general. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you follow the lower contour of that bird, it looks chubby. And that's just, it's not that these are fatter than the other birds. They're just built stockier like that. Kind of like me, I'm built stocky too. All right, on to the last group. And the last group are the Buteos. And the Buteos are large hawks with broad wings and broad shoulders. And we have 4 different kinds that we'll get here in the wintertime. Of the 4, really, there are only 3 common kinds. The other one is an occasional visitor, but I thought we'd throw him in because it's becoming a little bit more common recently anyway. So we'll get to that. Our first Buteo is a ferruginous hawk. The ferruginous is the largest of the Buteos, and some people think, and I might be one of them, that they're the prettiest of the Buteos, although I kind of am partial to the rough-legged hawk too. They're both pretty gorgeous. But the reason this guy's so beautiful is because it's a nice, rich mixture of white plumage, almost pure white plumage, and red plumage, which you don't see that much in the hawks. And then they have some stuff going on with their bill that's just incredible. I'll show you in a second. They have reddish backs and reddish leggings. Now, of the 4 pictures that I gave you here, the only place you can see the leggings is the bird in flight in the center. If you go down by where his legs are, the legs on a ferruginous hawk are covered with red feathers, and some of them are covered with bright red feathers. So if you can see them pretty well from underneath, those red legs stand out from that white belly quite well, and they form this little red V underneath the belly. If you get that red V, then you know you have a ferruginous hawk. So the leggings are important if you can find them. They have prominent yellow nares and gape, and that yellow is very often closer to orange than yellow. You can see this a little bit, and I'll show you in a different bird later on. But look at the bottom right-hand bird. That's a bird that was on the side of the road up near Paulina a few years ago, and he was just sitting there kind of waiting for something to move. and he let me take pretty good pictures of him. But you can see that orange at the base of the bill, and then orange on the face as well. And it gives them this orange smile that we'll take a look at in just a second. It also has a white tail that's sometimes scattered with some orange or red feathers, but that white tail becomes important because it doesn't have a band on the end of it. It's just a whitish tail, and that becomes important a little while later. And then look at the bird in flight. This bird has long, narrow wings. If that was a red-tailed hawk, those wings would be much wider than that. So that's something to be thinking about. If I see a bird soaring, long, narrow wings, it's got a V for where the legs are, a red V, and when it banks on the back, I can see red feathers with white tail. That makes myself a Ferruginous hawk. One more thing, though, to look at. Notice that the head is pale on all four of these birds, and notice that the breast is relatively clean on the two that you can see, upper left and lower right. The breast is relatively clean. There's not a clear belly band anyway, like there will be with red-tailed hawk. So lack of a belly band means that the front is almost pure white, and that's going to make it a Ferruginous hawk. Next one is our rarest Buteo, and again, I normally wouldn't put this in a presentation, but they're becoming more and more common all the time. So I think we're going to be a bird we'll see more in the future. It's called a red-shouldered hawk, and it's a bird that 25 years ago was only found in the southern part of Western Oregon, and that bird's expanded now all the way up into the north and all the way across the mountains into our area. And we get them annually now anyway in Central Oregon. It's the smallest Buteo. It looks like a very small red-tailed hawk. It's reddish back with white spots, prominent yellow nares, which means right at the base of the bill. There's some, you can see that on the two bottom pictures. There's a nice little yellow spot there. That's found in some of the other birds as well. It has a barred tail. That means, and this is important because that's going to separate it from a red-tailed hawk. Look at the center picture on the bottom. See that striped tail? That's a characteristic that you won't find with red-tailed hawk. Red-tailed hawk won't have those narrow white bands like that. And so that's one thing you'll want to keep in mind. Look at the tail. And then finally, it has what we call wing windows. And the wing windows are white patches. You can see the underwing. Look at the bird that has the circle on it. And you can see the underwing there. The underwing has a nice big white patch, which some of the birds have. Other birds have that as well. But then on the other side, on the back side of the wing, there's also a white patch inside the circle. And it's the combination of the white on both sides of the wing that make it look, when this bird flies, it makes it look like you can see through those, what we call panels, or see through those areas on the wing. It looks like they're transparent when it flies. And so we say that it has wing windows because you can look through them. And if you see those wing windows, then that's a real good indication that you have a red-shouldered hawk. I'll keep going because I'm running a little bit late on time here. The next bird is the rough-legged hawk, and a rough-legged hawk is actually relatively easy to identify most of the time. First is take a look at the color of the head on this bird. You wouldn't call that a dark color. You'd say that has a light-colored head, and that's important because it's going to separate us from the red-tailed hawk that's coming up here in just a second. This bird has a light-colored head in almost all plumages. Sometimes it's dark, but most of the time it's light. It has long wings with carpal squares. So if you look at the bird in flight, there's a red arrow pointing to a black square in the wing, right where the wrist is. And we call those carpal squares. And those guys are found on, especially the lighter colored birds, you can see them quite easily. And that's a pretty much a done deal. If you can find those squares, that's going to be your main field mark to identify your rough-legged hawk. It has a white, black, and white body. That means white at the front, black in the middle, white at the end, what I call a reverse Oreo, because everything's cookie oriented to me. The tail is white, but it has a dark tip to it. And actually, there's a little tiny white fringe at the end of the tail, but there's a nice thick band before that of darker feathers. So when you see it most of the time in flight, it looks like it has a dark band. That will help it separate from the ferruginous hawk that has a white tail also, but it doesn't have that dark band at the end. And then it does a lot of hovering flight, much like the American kestrel does, where it just sits in one place and flaps its wings, maintains altitude, and hunts from that position. We call that hovering flight. And then when it's perched, look at the bird at the bottom left. It always looks big-headed to me. That means compared to a red-tailed hawks have skinny heads, and rough-legged hawks have fat heads. And I always look for that from a distance because that helps me identify them quickly. Okay, so once again, we're looking for a light-headed hawk here. It has the black carpal squares when it flies. It has a reverse Oreo coloration. That's white in the front, dark in the middle, and white in the ends. It has a white tail with a black band, and it's big-headed when it sits on a telephone pole. Rough-legged hawk. Okay, our last bird is a red-tailed hawk. And you'll notice that at the top of the slides, it says it's probably a red-tailed hawk because I have a rule. My rule is it's a red tail until it's not a red tail. Any of you that have gone out raptor counting with me know that I use that rule all the time. It's a red tail until it's not a red tail. And what that means is that most of the raptors you're going to see are red-tailed hawks. And what you need to do then is realize that probably when you see a raptor, it's probably going to be a red-tailed hawk, but you still need to look at it because it might not be a red-tailed hawk. And so you want to look for the things that make it a red tail, check those things off real quick, and then you can be on your way. And you don't have to spend very much time on that bird if you're counting different species or whatever you're doing for the day. But it's probably a red tail is something that you're going to probably want to learn to say because it's probably a red tail most of the time. Red tails, their characteristics are they have dark heads. Now remember, our other two common birds that are here in the wintertime, the rough leg and the ferruginous hawk, both have light colored heads. So dark colored heads is important. That's the first thing we're going to look at. Dark colored heads, it has broader wings than both the rough leg and the ferruginous hawk. But that takes a little bit of practice watching the two of them fly together. But what doesn't take very much practice is to find the belly band. That means that a bird with a light colored chest will have right around the belly area some darker flecks of darker feathers. It won't be usually a solid band, but it'll be a light band formed by specks of dark colored feathers. You can see this on the upper left-hand bird. There's a nice dark band right across the belly, and you can see it on the bird in flight on the bottom right. There's a little not quite as pronounced dark band across the belly. One thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about the broad wings, you can see the broad wings of this bird in the bird that's in flight. Also note that right at the front edge of the broad wings, looking at the bird that's in flight again, right at the front edge, there are two dark areas that go from about the armpits out to the wrist, but right on the leading edge of the wing. Those are called patagial or patagial marks. And that's a characteristic of red-tailed hawk. If you can find the patagial mark, then you have yourself a red-tailed hawk. But if we're gonna go through, let's see, I got one more. If you look at the bird in the upper left-hand area, the one with the red tail in the top of the slide, notice that there are two white sort of marks on either side of the back. And when that bird's in a sitting position, now go to the bottom picture below it, and you'll see that those two white marks tend to kind of come together to form a little bit of a V. And that V is more pronounced in some birds than it is in others. And so in order to identify a bird that's perched, like the bird that's in the upper left, you want to note that it has a dark head and note that it has a belly band. That's a red-tailed hawk. If his back is to you, then like the bird on the bottom, you look for that white V that formed. And sometimes it's not there, but if it is there, that's a good indication it's probably a red-tailed hawk. Okay, dark head, belly band, patagial marks, red tails. If you get all those guys, you've got yourself a red-tailed hawk. And then, of course, it wouldn't be quite that simple because the red tails come in lots of different colors. You have dark red tails like the bird that's in the upper left, and you have light colored red tails like the birds that are in the upper right. And then you have everything in between. No two red tails look the same. The two birds that are on the bottom are a mated pair. The female is a little bit bigger than the male, so you might be able to note that the female is on the right and the male is on the left. Our right and our left anyway, not theirs. But these two birds will mate and have babies, and their babies will probably look different than they do. Every red tail looks different from every other red tail, especially as adults anyway. So it makes it kind of difficult. You just need to keep in mind that there are always dark birds and always light birds. Stick with your field marks we just talked about, though. They're all still there. Even that bird on the left, and the dark bird that's on the left, has a belly band. You just have to look very carefully to see that dark band that goes across the belly. But both of them have dark heads. If you can flip them around, both of them would have a little bit of white in the wings on the back. We still use the same field marks we used before, regardless of what phase they're in, dark or light. Then you have to be careful with all of the buteos because they all have that same thing. They all have dark morphs and they all have light morphs. And sometimes they can look really odd. Here we have three really dark birds that are three different species. I'm going to give you 5 seconds of silence. See if you can figure out which one's which species these three are. Then I'll tell you. Time. See how well you did. The bird in the upper left has a belly band across the top. Not across the top, across the belly anyway. It's a darker area. It's a little bit subtle, but it's a darker area. It's a dark-headed bird with a dark belly band. That's a red-tailed hawk. The bird on the bottom has a white tail with a black band on the end. Other than that, it's an almost solid black bird. So it's very difficult, but that white tail with a black band on the end tells me that's a rough-legged hawk. And then the one on the upper right is a ferruginous hawk, and I know it's a ferruginous hawk for a couple of things. One is that the tail has got a lot of white in it, and then the other thing is that smile, that gape is what we call it. That bright yellow gape looks like almost lipstick. That's one of the characteristics of the ferruginous hawk. I mentioned before that sometimes it's bright orange, but in this bird it's just yellow. So red tail on the left, rough leg in the middle, ferruginous hawk on the right. If you got all three right, then $100 a piece. I'll write you a check. We do have something that I'll just mention. We do have a bird called a Harlan's hawk. And Harlan's hawks are just notoriously difficult to identify, I think, anyway. But in general, Harlan's hawks are red-tailed hawks. They're not considered a different species. They're considered to be red tails, but they don't have red tails. Instead, their tails are generally whitish or white. You can see a sort of a fan spread of one of them in the upper left-hand corner up there, and that's an example of a Harlan's hawk that's got a bit of a darker tail. Most of the other ones that I show here have a lighter tail than that, but it has a white tail instead of a red tail, usually some kind of banding along with it, and then it often has a white head too, or a lighter colored head. So this is just one of those things that's a difficult bird to identify. I haven't found a great tool for giving me, because there's so much variation in Harlan's hawk too. It's just difficult to say exactly how to tell one Harlan's from another, but they're out there anyway. We do have them every year. In fact, all of these photos, except for that tail photo, were taken right here in Crook County. So there's that. Then the last thing is, the biggest thing about hawk migration or hawk identification is you got to know your red tails. You have to be able to say that's a red tail, that's a red tail, that's a red tail. That's your first question when you ask yourself, is that a red tail? Your first question has to be, does it have a dark head? If it has a dark head, you're almost 50% of the way home, because most of the dark-headed ones are going to be red-tailed hawks. But keep in mind that it's a red tail until it's not a red tail. And your first question is going to say, it's going to be, does this thing have a dark head? If it has a dark head, it's probably a red tail. We're not going to stop there. We'll go on to more in just a little bit. But take a look at these two birds. If I'm spotting these guys quickly, I go, does it have a dark head? The answer is yes, for both of them. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe I have two red tails here. Then I go to the next field mark. Look at the belly band on the bird on the left. Belly band, check. That's a red tail for sure. Bird on the right, belly band, check for sure. Dark head, belly band, red tail right off the bat. I can't see the back of the tail, so I don't know if it's red or not, but I don't need to be able to. If I get that dark head and belly band, then I know I've got a red-tailed hawk. Here we go, two different birds. The one on the left has a red tail. I can check mark it as soon as that happens. There's no other bird in Central Oregon that has a all red tail like that. So that's a red-tailed hawk. Bird on the right has a belly band. It's an odd looking bird because it's almost a black and white bird or a black and cream colored bird. But it's definitely a red tail. It has a belly band right across the band there. That makes it a red-tailed hawk and a dark head. Now, there are always exceptions to every rule. Some of them don't have a belly band. Some of them don't have a dark head. Heck, some of them are just weird, like the one that's on the left right there. That's a bird we don't get here in this part of Oregon, but I think that's a Kreider's hawk, but it may actually be just a leucistic hawk. I don't know. I didn't look it up. But the one on the right over there but the one on the left is definitely a red-tailed hawk because it has a red tail. The one on the right is also a red-tailed hawk because it has a belly band of darker feathers right across the belly. If it would turn around, we could probably see that white V on his back probably too. Speaking of white V, look at these two birds. Now, my first question is, does it have a dark head? And the answer with this one is, well, maybe not. Maybe it doesn't have a dark head. So I'm going to look for other field marks because if it doesn't have a dark head, it might be a frugious hawk. It might be a rough-legged hawk. But in this case, it's a red-tailed hawk. And I know it's a red-tailed hawk for two things. One is it has a red tail. That makes it a red-tailed hawk. And then it has that little black V kind of area, sort of a white smudgy patch on the left side of the wing, on the left wing, and a white smudgy patch on the right wing, which makes the two come together in kind of a little V. That makes a red-tailed hawk. I'm going to skip those guys. These are two dark phase birds, but look at the bird on the left. Can you see the belly band? That's a red-tailed hawk. Here I've got a red-tailed hawk, and over there on the bird that's on the right, bird on the right that's a red-tailed hawk. I can tell because it has a dark head and a belly band. Bird that's on the left in flight, I can't see very much, but if I look for the belly band, the belly region, it's a dark area. There's ahead of that belly region, the feathers are reddish, and behind it they're reddish, but in the middle they're dark. That's a belly band. That's a red-tailed hawk. White V's on both of these birds, or at least white patches on the back of the wing. That makes red-tailed hawk, and also red tail on the one on the left. Remember the patagial or patagial mark? That's the black mark right at the leading edge of the wing, right between the wrist and the armpit of the bird. That patagial mark, I can see that on the bird on the left. That makes it a red tail. If you look in the bird on the right, that patagial mark is there as well. Red-tailed hawk. And I'll whip through that. I think that is the last one. This is an odd red tail. The bird that's on the right. We looked at this for a long time. I was with someone probably in this meeting. We looked at this bird for a long time. I'm pretty sure it's a red tail, but we never knew for sure. And then just more belly bands. I want to whip through this thing and be done with it. But let's go ahead and knock that off, and I'll stop my share and see if anybody has any questions. If you want to just unmic and ask a question if you have a question. There's a test. Actually, I won't give you a test. I had a test, but it's already an hour and a half here, so we're probably going to knock it off pretty good. No one has a question? That means I answered all your questions already. Perfect.
You did it so good, Chuck. It's good. I mean, we did have a question. You explained it so well. So
You guys are probably swimming in all that information.
Yeah.
Now you just
We
got to
gotta-
remember it
we-
all. Okay,
we
so
appreciate-
one of the things that I will do is that I'll collect all this information, or not all of it, but I'll kind of Reader's Digest it down, and I'll send everyone an email that has an attachment to it that has that in sort of a little table format, so you can see what the red tails, what to look for, and what to look for with the prairie falcons and all that stuff. And I'll send that to you. And I'll also send you a link of the recording of this meeting and presentation. And I'll send you also a copy of the PowerPoint if you want. You just have to tell me. Everybody good?
Thank you very much, Chuck. Good luck on your
Thank
trip.
you.
One more thing before I go, one more thing is that we have winter raptor surveys coming up, and we do surveys out in Paulina. We do surveys north of Prineville. We do surveys west of Prineville. There's one that goes south of Prineville. There's one that covers Powell Butte. If you're interested in those guys and you'd like to ride along, you don't need to be an expert or anything like that. Just a pair of eyes is helpful. If you are interested in doing that and riding along, just give me an email and let me know, and I'll try to set you up with one of those guys.
Question. I read,
Okay,
to-
Gabe.
I
What?
read, I read today about, I think they called it whiffling. Have you ever seen?
June,
Where'd
are
you
you
go,
talking? No. Oh, sorry. I heard somebody was talking, but I couldn't tell who it was.
What? Can you hear me now?
Is that Mary Jane?
Yes, it is.
Yes, I can hear you.
I read today about whiffling or maple leaping. Have you ever seen that?
I don't even know what that is. What is it?
Well, it's when the bird wants to come down really fast on prey. They do that to lose altitude.
Do they
And
flip over? Is that what they're talking about?
Yeah, it's like they flip over and go backwards, upside down. And
Yeah,
I was wondering if you'd ever seen that.
I have. In fact, Jeff Nordstrom and I were standing on a place called Lake Abear, and Lake Abear has a big salt lake out in southeastern Oregon, and right next to it is a giant, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of feet this bluff is up there, but there was a prairie falcon that was up on the top. So it's a mile and a half away, and it took off and gained speed all the way down the face of that cliff, 1,000-foot cliff. And then it flattened out a little bit. And by the time it flattened out, it was going pretty close to 100 miles an hour. I wouldn't say over 100, but pretty close to 100 miles an hour. And we, as it was coming down, we could start to hear it. So we looked up and you could see that bird flip over for a
Yeah.
little bit and then flip back over. And then when it went by us, it sounded just like a jet. It just, right when it went past us. So it was pretty fantastic.
That must have been awesome.
It was pretty awesome.
Well, I guess they call it whiffling now, so now you know.
I'll have to look it up. Yeah.
Right on. All right. Thank you. Great
Okay.
presentation.
All right,
Good night,
gang.
all.
I'm gonna, if anybody else has a question, just holler at me. But other than that, I'm gonna probably end it and go get something to eat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chuck.
You
Yes,
betcha.
and Chuck, keep me
Yes,
in mind
Bob.
for your raptor survey.
What's that?
Keep me in mind for your raptor survey. This is Bob.
Bob, I can't do it without you. You're my guy. All right, gang. Thanks for coming to the meeting. We'll see you next month. Well, we'll see you in 2 months.
All right,
Okay, bye-bye.
bye now.
Thank you. Later.
Bye.
Hit what?
Leave.
Oh, yeah.